Now, over to introducing our speaker and our talk for today, Rivastra, Reviving Ancient Indian Fashion Rituals. Ancient Indians knew the secret to practical and spiritual fashion. Fabric from the earth, dyed by wind and rain, embellished by and with awareness, chosen for the feel of sunshine or shade, as ritual textiles worn as garments prioritized comfort, seasonal needs, freedom of movement, and circular fashion. All these phrases that we find so popular today, but they have a history. This made daily dressing an act of connection with nature and local artisanship. At this talk today, Bhavana Pingali, the founder of a spiritual fashion platform, talks about bringing all that forgotten ritualistic ethos back. Fashion as self-care, kindness to our bodies, and a handshake with the planet, and reviving these historic practices for modern living. Bhavna Pingali is a fashion writer and academic who's been engaged in the fields of fashion, design, and media for over 2 decades. She's the author of The Art of Decluttering, Ancient Practices for Modern Living. With a background in fashion, design, and journalism, she served as fashion features editor at Femina with Times Group and has written for The Hindu, Mint Lounge, and more. She's taught at top institutions like NIFT, Mumbai, Pearl Academy, and Symbiosis, and consulted for over 15 organizations and lifestyle brands. Currently, she's focused on yoga pranayam, writing, sketching, and reviving traditional practices through her spiritual fashion platform, Rivastra. So delighted to have you here, Bhavna, and absolutely over to you and waiting to hear what you have to tell us.
Firstly, thank you very much, Suki, for that lovely introduction about Khaki Lab and, of course, about my work. Thank you so much, the rest of you, for attending this. And I really appreciate giving in the next 45 minutes to 1 hour of your time over a weekend. Just to talk about, as Suki mentioned, that it is about the word re-vastra, as it says. It's about the re or the circular philosophy, and the vastra is about fabrics. I have been in the industry of fashion after studying design, and I started writing about it. So the whole concept of rituals came into my life more to do when I had my son, and obviously how things change in our bodies and our minds. And then I got into yoga and I got into other aspects of spirituality, and then drawing the parallels between fashion, which is my main core of area work, because I was writing about it anyways and talking about it. And then connecting the dots with spirituality, with Reiki and yoga and Ayurveda for my own body and mind started coming together. And I realized the hardest thing in this entire story was consistency, because I think knowing the ritual versus actually applying it and making it wisdom was the most difficult thing. I think historically, we have, all of us, I'm sure, know that we have tons of rituals in India. And it's very difficult to empirically, emotionally, any other way document it and then actually do justice to it. So I started using those rituals through the vehicle of a sari. That was how it all started for me. And in that around 2016, my mother was diagnosed with dementia. And personally, things started changing. I had a little kid, and you know how things, we all have our, as I was mentioning and telling Suki, we all have our stories, and each of us writes a book, becomes a story in itself. That is the beauty of a life. So I had to obviously take care of her. And then saris became a vehicle for me to tell her stories, because she had forgotten her identity and her history. So it became very important for me to tell her stories through something she loves and her identity, coming from the south of India. And I'm born in Odisha from Andhra with Karnataka lineage, and lived all over the country. So it was a mixed heritage, but sari has been a common point that connected the dots for me, my mother, and a lot of us. And that was a ritual, as a draping ritual. That was my first ritual I got back in terms of fashion. And then I realized sari draping is the aspect of draping. We kind of look at it in a perfect way. The ancient way is all about 5 techniques, which is knotting, pleating, folding, tucking, and draping. That's the 5 basic techniques of doing it. And there was no concept of petticoat or blouse. It was a rectangular piece of fabric which was off the loom, And the weavers treated the concept of creating this so beautifully and meditatively that it had a soul and it had the potential to take the shape that you want and being forgiving of your body. I think that is the most beautiful and spiritual ritual for me, and irrespective of a gender. Now, a sari, be it a dhoti or a shawl or a turban, you see, or a gamcha, that is the towel, all are rectangular shapes. So I started analyzing this, and that is how it came into my life. And I understood the aspect of draping the sari and going back into the ancient technique of draping and using it without a petticoat. And of course, you can't skip the blouse. But having said that, you can definitely rewear the blouse in different ways. Like the Haryanvis, if you go into the north of India, the Rajasthanis wear a shirt. They don't wear a typical blouse. So and they wear it with the lehengas, or they have the shawls and the dupattas around them too, obviously. So every going back into the history of ancient costume is something that really drew me. And I realized that there were dots that were being connected with fashion and with the aspect of lifestyle. Now, fashion is seen only through the lens of trend or fad, but that's not how it is, because I've covered Fashion Week, being a fashion editor of a magazine. I was looking at it. You know how it is. We're trained to kind of look at it from a particular angle. But then I realized that there is a spiritual angle to every act. And that is how, if I'm allowed to share the presentation, I'm going to share something which I would like to kind of so going back, so this is what, for me, this picture is very representative of fashion and spirituality. And as I said, the vehicle of a sari. And draping was my first ritual that I got into. Historically, if you go into history, so there is the sthanapatta and the angavastram, and then you have the uttariya, which is the top fabric, and sthanapatta is the chest tie, and uttariyam is the stole, and then you have the veshti, which is the lower part, right? So if you go into Buddhist sculptures, you go into Jain sculptures, I'm talking of like 1500 BC and stuff, and then you keep moving historically into the present through the Mughal era from the 15th century onwards, 1526, when Babur invaded the country and we had the Mughal Sultanate set up in the north of India. So their stitched clothing came up a little before that, obviously in India, but before that there was no unstitched, there was only unstitched clothing, and it was gender agnostic. So if you look at it, everything had a cyclical angle. So it was birthed from the earth and it went back to the earth, just like our bodies, just like our being. And there was nothing, we had no footprint that we left on this planet. Like if you look at a dog or a cow, actually they don't leave any footprints, literally, because everything is erased. They can walk on sand and the next thing, they have no record of their existence on this planet. But we as humans have high ego. We like to document our stories. We like to keep our stories, which is in a way good. And in a lot of ways, when it comes to things like rituals and stuff, documenting is essential. But having said that, keeping that ecological balance is a very difficult narrative to achieve. So this picture kind of puts everything together for me, from yoga to, so it's basically sustainability, spirituality, and saris. So there are three angles that I kind of work together now. So, and while learning and teaching yoga, teaching is incidental. I'm always a learner. And just now I learned this sentence from Sukhi, who beautifully said that I'm a yoga learner. And that's true. We all stay there, particularly. So that is one thing. And if you see, this picture has a lot of, this is a kanchi sari, and it's one of my old wedding saris, which I upcycled. And typically, if you go into Kanchipuram saris, like Korvai borders, it's a traditional weave, and a lot of ritualistic weaving. They used to actually chant when they even wove. They did a lot of prayers before doing it because it was a very mindful exercise. And it was not related to any religion technically. It was about clothing. That's the basics of, in Hindi, we call it the roti kapda makan, right? It's about the clothing, which is sheath, which is the first sheath, or in yoga, we call it the panchakosha. So in the Panchakosha, the first sheath is our Annamaya Kosha, which is where we have the food and water and the needs. So clothing is part of that. So it is brilliant in terms of the visual, and the flowers are a representative of the ritual of how jewelry used to be in the past, where technically there was, before the advent of metal, flowers and natural things like feathers and shells and stones and twigs and all of this, or leaves, would become jewelry for humans. And they had absolutely cyclical value, but to just go back into the earth at the end of, there is no long lasting aspect to it. Then, of course, the This is like a mandala, which is actually, this is an ethi pot. And it is representative of the yogic philosophy of a wellness of body mind. Now, if you look at the rituals, so a couple of rituals I'd like to talk about, because obviously there are hundreds of them, and what I have kind of imbibed and tried to bring in, as I said, first is the sari draping. And the second one, which I realized, was tearing and mending, which is, it links to upcycling as an old world ritual. And I talk about it in my chapter. The first chapter, one of the chapters is, as I said, sari, wearing it the kashta, which in Maharashtrian way it's called the kashta, the nawari. Whereas coming from Andhra, it's called the kachakattu drape or the gochi kattu. There are lots of bogiliposi, there are lots of drapes. And if you're from Andhra, you'll understand the context. So bogiliposi is basically, bogu is coal. So the women used to collect coal. And ritualistically, that was their everyday work. But how did the fashion adapt itself is they made the drape in such a way that there are cowls or little bags on the sides that used to carry the pieces of coal for them. So the sari became a carrier of their product or their livelihood rather. But the drape was adapted to their body and to the need. So they only used things like knotting. It wasn't stitched. And they just would go into the things, collect the coal pieces and bring it back. So similarly, the kachakattu drape is like a loin cloth which is tied. And of course, initially it was all caste related. But if you look at a drape taking that religion and the hierarchy of caste away from it and the superiority of all of it, which is probably not something we want to talk about, we can definitely look at the essence of a sari. And that aspect has a spiritual and a mystical angle. So every weave and every motif and every symbol, a sari is a rectangle piece which has 5 sections, which is the border, which is the sides, which is the end. Then you have the field or the body, it's called. Then you have the pallu, right? So these are 4 to 5 sections in a sari, and that can go shorter, narrower or shorter depending on the area. So the rituals I saw in the tribes of Odisha, because my granddad was posted in the south of Odisha, which is called Koraput. So there are districts in Odisha called Malkangiri and Koraput, the 2 south districts of Odisha, which is very close to Andhra. That's how my family moved from this North Andhra belt, Visakhapatnam, Rajahmundry area to the south of Odisha, my great-grandfather and grandfather. So I would see these tribals when I was a child wear these saris without their blouses, without their petticoats, and be absolutely body confident and be very comfortable in their skin with flowers and little things that they love decorating their bodies with, and only using knotting. And every time, depending on the need and the hour of the day or what they need, this drape would change. So it was a shapeshifter. So it would move, and your body is ritualistically changing with the seasons in the year. So we don't have 4 seasons in India, we have actually 6 seasons. Right? So, or actually, if you look at it, there are many festivals and many seasons for every religion and every tribe and cult. When you look at them, the sari kind of changes its form depending on that. And it's the same rectangular piece of fabric. So coming back to the second thing, I realized that these heirloom saris, how they would pass it on was this aspect of hierarchical passing it on. So the grandmother would pass it on to the mother. Then the mother would pass it on to the daughter, and that would go on. So the sari has lasted you for a long time, changing its shape ritualistically according to their living and lifestyle, and according to the age, according to the climate, according to the need. And it was a beautiful philosophy. It has a spiritual angle. So if you look at a sari, the way it's tied, the belly is open, the back is open. So philosophically, you can't really prove it because, again, documentation is a big issue. But they would say that yogically it's about band, tying it tightly and supporting your back and keeping your navel open for the sun, and, literally, because navel is it's an element of spirituality. So, and it would keep changing till they would reach a space of heirlooms. Now we call them heirlooms. Like a sari becomes an heirloom of 50, 60, 100-year-old or whatever. But obviously after a while it dies. It has a death cycle. It has a life cycle. But in the name of nostalgia, we were holding on to our saris. So when my mother fell ill, for the longest time, I would say, oh, I don't want to touch her saris. Let it be, let it be. But they start unraveling. They have a time, space, and existence on this planet. It's a thing at the end of it, a material object. And in physics, as they say, metaphysics, it's when matter is condensed, it becomes an object. I'm not from a science background, but of what a very simple layman's perspective. Similarly, this sari became a material object for me, which was holding memories, which was holding emotions, philosophy, spirituality, religion, a lot of stuff. And the weight of it was that I was sitting with the nostalgia. And that's when I realized the second ritual is about tearing it to create something new. So the tearing and the mending aspect. So if you go back into the ancient ritual, the second ritual is very powerful and through sari as a vehicle, was tearing the sari, that is destruction, to create something new. You have to destroy something. Till you don't destroy, we to build a new building, we have to destroy an old one. Similarly, to renovate, we have to destroy some parts. Similarly, if you want a good crop, we literally raise the ground through, the topsoil is regenerated in different farming practices. So similarly in garments, a sari has to be cut. But what the ritual of the past was about cutting it with a lot more awareness. So coming from the south of India, we call it the pattu langa or the pattu pavada. So it was about making clothes for the children. So ritualistically, they would go, make a dhoti out of it for the men, or probably a little stole to wrap around, or kanthas. And you have the Siddhi, for instance, in Karnataka, you have the African descendants who do the Siddhi quilts. And then in Rajasthan, Gujarat and all that, they have the Rabadi upcycling. Then in Odisha, you have the Pipli, which is applique, and it's also like a applique, although, but it is a patchwork and applique in a combination. Bengal has the famous kantha, which is about layering old saris and dhotis. So for everything, if you look at Sujni, and you look at all these rituals of collectivism, where all the people used to come together, tear something to create something beautiful for the community and for themselves. So it was, I think, that is one thing which stayed with me from a fashion perspective, and also from a philosophical and a spiritual perspective. And so when I started tearing these saris to upcycle the clothes, I started researching on this ritual of tearing and mending. And one of the chapters in the book, again, is about tearing and mending, how tearing was actually a catharsis of sorts as a ritual. Where initially, if you look at a lot of religions, they self-flagellation, they would flog themselves on bare bodies and also on clothes. And the torn cloth is revered, then it is buried. So Jewish customs, or you go into Islamic, or you go into a lot of others. A Hindu philosophy has its own, it's not like literally tearing, but if it's torn, it is upcycled. It is repaired with a lot of love, and repaired or buried, let go with a lot of reverence. So this is one second ritual that I latched onto, and I started experimenting it through Revastra. And that gave me a lot of understanding of my own body, of the saris, and of my mother losing her memories. And for the longest time, I was very sad about the fact that she was losing her memories. And then I started relooking at it differently. I get the chance to take care of her. She's almost 80 as a primary caregiver. And I started having, relaxed moments with her. I would let her give a sari and let her jog her memory to tell me the story of that sari. How did she wear it? What did she do with it? And it would jog her memory, and she'd tell me the story again, second time, third time, fourth time. And there was a sense of joy. So that sharing for me was giving me so much joy. It was letting me release that pain of losing her mentally. And it was a very spiritual experience for me. So the fashion part of it, or my understanding of fashion through that sari, gave me such a beautiful understanding of this mental space and the mental health. And incidentally, I was going through my mental health issues. I was going through my depression and postpartum depression and a lot of stuff, and my body was not taking a lot of things, and I was in a job, and you know how it is with a lot of stuff, and your mind goes into a tizzy, body goes into a tizzy, and I had all my parameters in the body off, and yoga was helping me. At the same time, the upcycling saris using rituals was helping me. And looking at my mother and taking care of her and not begrudging it was really helping me. I started connecting with dots. And that is how this refashion of self came in, and the recycling of saris. So through fashion rituals, when I started looking at those ancient fashion rituals, this is how it started coming through for me. And there was a sense of re-philosophy that I started looking at hooded saris. I started looking at saris which haven't been touched for the longest time. Sometimes we keep buying saris that's 5.5 meters of fabric, and look at, if you have 10 saris you've not worn the entire year, you have over 55 meters. Mathematically, look at more than that actually. X number of meters, 70 meters. I'm not good at maths, so you can calculate the number. So 5.5 into 10. So I think it's 55. So anyways, So look at the amount of fabric that you are sitting on doing nothing. And there is so much of spiritual and fashion potential. Look at styling techniques or draping techniques, or look at how to kind of reuse it, how to upcycle it. You will have hundreds of ways to look at it and then understand your own body and mind thanks to ancient fashion rituals. And that is the power that, not just looking at fashion through a physical or superficial point of view. Of course, it's an important aspect. If I don't dress well, I'll not feel good. And nobody is going to, really believe me that I'm a fashion editor and I'm a fashion, writer, and I'm talking about all this. Having said that, there is a sense of balance and even enoughness I want to reach. And this exercise kind of helped me in understanding. Now, where it comes in terms of stemming from it is, if you look at the sari market in India is over 80,000 crore as in 2025, right? 800 billion new pieces of clothing are consumed every day. This is a statistic. You might find a difference in the statistical data, but of course, you can refute me if you find something else. Please don't, because I'm sure with the advent of AI and stuff like that, this is what I understand. Fashion is one of the most polluting industries today. And sari stock with Indian families over 300 crores. This is a bare minimum. About 90% of Indians buy at least one sari a year. This is the minimum number. Of course, if you look at your own wardrobe as women and as men, we wear kurtas, we wear shirts, and we wear dhotis. There are lots of men on this conversation or whatever, this platform right now. You'll see that we do have a lot of stocking, and our consumption is higher than what is a need, right? And clothing consumption has grown to over 400% over the last 20 years. And in 21, which was during COVID, the market size of the sari, blouse, and petticoat was 28,800 crore, which is actually a huge number in terms. This is the statistical data that a lot of websites and a lot of information platforms throw out. But if you forget the numbers, this is a fact. This is a reality we live with today. And we are part of that reality. And if you go back into the ancient practices and rituals, this reality, like a little drop in the ocean, we can kind of change it. We can look at our own wardrobes and start looking at this reality differently. So the second thing now about nostalgia, because we hold on to saris. Nostalgia is creative. And it can be progressive, it can be conservative as well. So these are a couple of quotes that I love in terms of nostalgia, and that led me to the fashion rituals of bringing or reviving ancient fashion rituals. It can be a destructive force. I love this statement, and that can really incubate anger, isolation, or hatred. Right? At the same time, it can also become a vehicle of love and memory and joy, but only if you let it go and let it happen, let it flow. Right? Then the second one says, thanks for the memories. Nostalgia is no good for fashion. For the longest time, we hold on to pieces and without wearing it. Nostalgia is good as long as you're revamping it and reusing it. And from an ancient, again, going back to ancient rituals, this was something very natural. Buying new things was not something they would do. That's the third thing. It's about enoughness. Thanks to overconsumption, I went back to enoughness. So they actually, like my parents, when they got married, I'm not talking about like ancient right now. Even my parents, when they got married, my dad had 5 shirts being an army officer. He was a colonel in the army. And my mother had I think he had 3 shirts and my mother had 5 saris. So similarly, I'm sure your grandmothers, your grandparents, or anyone you know didn't have so much that we have today in terms of numbers, or in terms, we have moved from need to want to desire and a lot beyond desire. So the enoughness is one of the rituals in fashion that we forget. We can revive into our current lives. And seeing, suppose I have 10. Now we can't live with one pair of shoes. Okay, I have 10 pairs of shoes. But buying the 10th, 15th, 20th, and the 30th pair of shoe is now moving. So where is that boundary of excess? That is what it is. And most brands market that nostalgia as a powerful story. But if you look at the nostalgia, as BBC, one of the stories says, that stop, take a breath, look back into your wardrobe. So if you ask your grandparents or your great-grandparents, the parents, the first thing they'll say, I have enough. I have. Why do you want to buy another one? Right? So that comes from one of the rituals is accepting what you have, reusing it, and then ritualistically re-wearing it so many times. I think that's a beauty. There is a beauty in reuse, which we have forgotten. And this is the third ritual, and that's my understanding of fashion rituals. Um, Now, looking at saris through the lens of textile choices, now go back into a couple of rituals. Again, there are tons of rituals that we can adapt, adopt, tweak, rewire, pick, make our own blueprint. In the book, I talk about it. I picked up 9. Again, the 2, 3 are on fashion, 2, 3 are on body and mind. Then there are 2, 3 which are on other aspects like home and decoration and stuff like that. So fashion is not just about clothing. It extends into spaces and environments beyond our body, and a lot of social setups across where we live as a human. So I think the first thing which the textile choices which the ancient made were about silks and khadis and all the natural grounded materials. So that support skin health and honor tradition. So basically, there were no synthetics. Not against synthetics. Well, there is a lot of advantages for synthetics coming from a fashion background. I understand this, studied fashion. My undergrad is fashion design, and then I moved on to studying journalism, and then I did masters and all of that. But having said that, I understand there's a need for it. But stopping that and also understanding how can we combine the best of both worlds in textile choices. Having healing textiles, having textiles which have the best of the industrial and the future tech, and having textiles which have ancient rooted grounding reality. So if you look at a fabric like cotton, it has its own frequency. We all we believe in Wi-Fi, we believe in the internet working, and we believe in lightning striking, and then we have to believe in this energy because we are actually small little creatures of the planet. So we emit our own energy, and textile choices make a huge impact on how we support our health. So the polyester and the rayons and the synthetics have their own impact in microfibers and microparticles on our bodies and outside of it. The second thing, so obviously ancients didn't use that. So that was definitely, we can relook. Right now, as I speak, I have very minimal synthetic clothing in my wardrobe. And I try to choose a very conscious textile choices from the past, and khadi and hand woven and stuff like that. You can't get very dogmatic about it, but at the same time, you can definitely become conscious. The second thing is seasonal and climatic attunement. Today, we sit inside flats, we sit inside closed environments, we don't even look at the sun. So, according to yoga and philosophy, looking at the sun is like a charging point almost. We have to charge our phones, so we need to charge our bodies. So we have to step out. And from the time I started adapting these rituals, so be it squatting every day, be doing my yoga and doing malasana, which is the squatting, or barefoot walking and walking in the sun, I see a difference in my own energy. I think I feel better. My skin is better, my health feels better, all of that. And I'm in touch with the sun and the moon, which is her and her of part, which is the masculine and the feminine. And then I'm in touch with the seasons. So if you have the monsoon, and whichever geography you are in India for that matter, if you have more climatic and colder regions, look at the clothing, the cult, the seasons as a base for choosing the fabrics and choosing your styling. And breathable cottons for summer. This is just plain logic. We don't need to study textile science to know this. This is just basic human logic with the ancients, which they had instinctively. They wouldn't wear velvets and heavy furs and leopard prints and stuff like that sitting in tropical climates. They would graduate towards cottons and linens. And definitely, but if you are in a cold climate like Mongolia, or initially European country, or somebody sitting in Antarctic, you can't possibly be wearing cottons. It's common sense that they would end up wearing furs and kill animals for it. So then there is layering. You can look at different ways, and they would layer it. So a sari is layered, like a dhoti is a layered aspect. So uttariya goes on top. All the unstitched fabrics are layered. You look at the Mughal garments, they're very beautifully, the angrakhas, and you have anarkali suits, and you have the lovely, those stoles and the jackets. I'm sure a lot of us have seen movies which are historically built, and we all love those movies, the way maybe Bhawana Pingali and a lot of designers who have worked on the costumes, historic costumes. And there is a power to it, definitely. And the way they ride horses in knotted clothing, the way they can do martial arts in it. So it was all seasonal, it was climatic, and it tuned to the sense of the planetary motions. As we speak right now, we are suspended on Earth, which is actually suspended in nothingness. And we could be at a like a 45-degree angle, where someone right now in Australia is upside down in our context, right? So the season is changing, the fabrics are changing, need to kind of devise themselves accordingly. Then there is body sensitivity. So in design, we have the elements and principles of design. Instinctively, if you go back into ancient fashion rituals, they understood that loose and draped silhouettes, like as I said, kamarband, to promote tightness on the waist because it needs support, whereas you need more ease on the upper body to move your arms and your limbs. Limbs need movement. So, and angrakha is like, you can go into a split in any of the pajamas, and those cowled pants or the Afghani pants and the dhotis and pajamas and salwars and churidars, you can actually do a lot of movement in them. Go upside down as well. So one of the chapters is about, can you breathe in the sari? And I remember my grandfather and my grandmother wearing their dhoti and the kachika too, and going upside down at the age of 80 plus doing the Shirsasana. So, and if you tell me to do my Shirsasana, I already have a cervical issue, even though I am learning yoga. So it's not something which our bodies are used to anymore, right? But they were doing it very naturally, and for them it was a part. So there was an interaction between that piece of clothing and your body, and there is definitely a connection. It's something like when you do the horse riding, you and the horse become one. Similarly, your piece of clothing and you, if you can become one, then it is not uncomfortable anymore. So choosing the right fit, the right form, not very loose, not very tight, comfort fit, where your body is moving in it with enough breathability. So that becomes a second one. It's about emotional comfort. It's about physical comfort. It's accepting your body and not criticizing it. Oh, I become fat and I become thin and these clothes are not fitting me. How we go into all those aspects of self-doubt and stuff. So the ancients, you would say that, oh, it's fine. I'll put on weight. I'll wrap the sari differently. Doesn't mean that we ignore our health. But definitely there was a lot more body acceptance. And you go into tribals, they drape their fabrics without worrying about shorter and bare-chested and stuff like that. They don't worry about body shaming and they don't worry about skin show. Then that comes from fashion ritual, which is rooted in confidence, body confidence. And the aspect of using smaller things beyond your body and in your environment. So I researched on something called the seed-filled eye pillows. I don't know, coming from Bengal, my son was born in Calcutta. So we call it there Soshe Balish and Rai ki takya in the north, and we call it Avalu Talagada in Telugu, and every culture. So they would stuff little pillows with different kinds of seeds, and especially mustard seeds is what I have memory with. So that was a ritual which gave me so much of understanding of my ego. I could let go of my ego because I wasn't very clear on how to adapt and adopt this ancient ritual in my life. And it's a personal well-being ritual. They would use an old sari to cut it up and make a little seed bag and stuff it with roasted sun-dried rusted mustard seeds. And that would apparently help little children not to get cold and shape their heads, and how it is. So that was one thing. And I used it to make little eye pillows during COVID to, how we were digitally strained, all of us. We were stuck in lockdowns and we were constantly on screens, and making that little eye pillow. And I remember I put in some dried lavender that I had, and I had no idea about eye pillows. Then later I Googled about it and I found lots of brands working on it. And that is a ritual. So if you go into Japanese old world rituals, you have the buckwheat pillows. And if you go into, so there was a whole history of pillows, which is about your body and your wellness. When you get up in the morning, you're using a pillow which is supporting your back and supporting your wellness. So similarly, and creating fabric-based daily objects. So it was about creating, instead of using wrapping papers, and instead of the potli was one ancient ritual I went back to. And we have a potli bags in fashion. You have those little bags with drawstrings, right? And but if you go into original history, in Japanese is furoshiki, you have the wrapping, gift wrapping techniques. In India, we have the potli, be it food or be it things or be it anything, everybody just wrap it in a scrap cloth, knot it and carry it. There were no concept of bags. There were no concept of plastics and using extreme paper bags. And we blink it 5 times a day and we get 5 paper bags. So that's how we work in. So this was one, these were rituals in the environment, which are not technically fashion, but fashion is beyond, as I mentioned, beyond our clothing. Fashion goes into all this. So making a jhola bag or a cloth bag was something that I started doing, and I started using it. Till date, I avoid taking plastics. So I'm phasing out plastics. It's not easy. Definitely, you can't sit on a pedestal and say, I'll be plastic free. Nobody is going to be 100% sustainable. Let's be honest in today's generation. But having said that, just living with a little bit of concept. Now, I've spoken about it. Now, the concept of symbolic jewelry is something that I'd like to highlight. Is things like, if you go into symbolic jewelry, there was something called Mukutavati, which was a pearl necklace. All the elements of all the jewelry in fashion adornment was very natural. So, pearls or gold or bronze or copper, you go back into the metals, they had the longevity and yet they were cyclical or circular in nature. They could go back to the earth. And so you have we call it the Kayura or the armband, like you wear it here. Then you have the Kundala, like Karn in Hindu philosophy, and this thing, you have the big earrings. You have Nupura, which are anklets. And so there were different needs and rituals that people started using all of this. And if you see now, the tribal jewelry is coming back, and it has come back over the years. We have all these spiky, golden, intricate designs, or the temple jewelry, and all of that. Then, of course, you have, if you look at stitched garment emergence, it was in the Gupta period during the 4th and 6th century CE, which is much before. Tunics, brocade coats. So we can actually upcycle the tunics, brocade coats, kaftans, saris, stoles from our old fabrics and on our saris, and bring back those shapes and garments which actually stem from the ancient shapes and forms, like in principles and elements of design, which is form, shape, color, texture, material, all of that, and apply the principles of rhythm, balance, and emphasis, and all the other principles of design, and see how it works on our bodies and minds. And as I mentioned initially, was things like weaving and spinning, and all of it was holistic energy, not just for the weaver but also for the wearer. And so they were basically Vedic hymns were chanted in the Hindu philosophy, or even if you look at somebody making it from any other religious perspective, there was a lot of the robes and all of this were very shapeless garments, in shapeless in the sense in today's context of parlance, but they were actually free flowing. Right? They were you look at all the religious robes, that most ecclesiastical robes that you have a sense of flow and freedom to them. There is a sense of mystical flow and freedom, and that gives you an expansiveness, not constriction and liberation. So if we look at form and fit, and that's something, we can bring back into our current scenario or a lifestyle. So again, if you look at borders, you look at the structural motifs and symbols and saris, I think they carry so much heritage because we cut through them very ruthlessly. But if you look at it geometrically, like a little paisley, or paisley is such an interesting pattern, like this little kairi or the mango shape. When you're cutting it, we can actually use the geometric lines of the sari to kind of understand how to kind of upcycle it. Because each symbol has an ancient heritage. It has a story that's speaking out silently. And if we understand those stories, and in the past, they would kind of think through these things. They were not, if a weaver is sitting and looking out and looking at coconut trees, for them, that becomes a symbol and they're weaving into that. So it takes the weaver like almost 3-4 days or 3 months to weave coconut trees on the sari. And we take a minute to forget about it. Right? So that ritualistic aspect is symbolism for me. That's the fourth aspect that I kind of went through. Right? And so reduce, reuse, recycle. That's the whole idea. And these fashion rituals came into the aspect of hoarding and recycling and understanding all of this. So Revastra was all about this philosophy, not just for your saris and not just for your clothing, but also these saris gave me an insight into understanding my other clothes, because we are not somebody who's wearing dhotis and saris all the time anymore. We end up wearing shirts, we end up wearing pants and other clothes, right? How do you kind of reuse the others in context to these ancient drapes, a shawl, for instance? Or you can just wrap it like knot it and wear it like a skirt. A stole, you can actually use it for something else and make a top out of it, probably for women. And for men, reuse your mother's or somebody and make a dhoti out of it, or make a loose angrakha style kurta, like one of the things, and upcycle it with mindfulness and awareness. And if you go back into those, you can make a stole that you can wear for a man, or a turban if you're so interested. So you can do any of that. And this is how these were little pages I had made to tell the stories, how to reduce the saris and how to reuse them. And how to prequel nostalgia in the sense how to let go of nostalgia using your ancient rituals before you kind of upcycle your clothes, upcycle your saris. And that is where I felt that, and also coming back into looking at reusing saris for me, as I mentioned, as a vehicle, as old world costumes. And not just if you see the Atpori sari, which is the Bengali style, you knot it and you can skip the petticoat because you wrap it 2-3 times and do that. So you can kind of wear it anyway, and then bring in other rituals like putting the alta for women, or for men, you can, men wear earrings, right? I mean, a lot of cultures, men do wear earrings. So it's not that you can't wear jewelry. And men, we have actually stigmatized men and said, oh, men can't wear jewelry. Definitely, if they love jewelry, they can wear it. So bring back the aspect of jewelry for men. And these little rituals like mehendi and parani, which is alta, and little tattooing, body art, and all those aspects which are lost to today's modern world. And it is an extension of fashion. Now, fashion is clothing, then there is accessory, there's body adornment. And body adornment was a huge thing in ancient fashion. And then, of course, I looked at how to reuse and reduce it from a very, not just a decorative perspective, but a geometric. There is sacred geometry involved in a sari. The way it's built on the loom and the way it is used off the loom. I think there is a lot of sacred geometry. And if you look at sacred geometry, it is in aspects like the kolam in Tamil Nadu and muggus in Andhra. You have, the chitta and the alpana and the, rangoli. You have geometry all around us constantly through animals, plants, things, nature. And we forget the fact that we ourselves are human geometry. We are aligned with the cosmos and the universe through our bodies and minds. And if we bring that aspect and understanding clothing, and I'm a huge proponent of origami as well. So Japanese culture comes into my life. I love making insects and things with origami, with paper, the origami paper. So I started understanding clothing and fabric through that, and understanding how ancient clothing had the sacred geometry as part of their fashion ritual or practice. And it was part of their existence and understanding of clothing. And this was basically how to kind of make these scarves without really cutting through the geometry as much as possible. You can't really not cut or waste, but make it zero waste as much as possible. So these will, cut the neckline out and you can make little wraps and stuff like that. I started experimenting and understanding the rituals and fashion and aspect of ancient history and how every garment. So you look at the earlier, I'm talking of the BC garments, or you look at the current AD garments and the modern garments, and the history of fashion tells you from ecological perspective and nature-based perspective how they work. So this zero waste is a key in the fifth ritual, is about upcycling collectively and also for the self. And it was one of the rituals that really brought me back. And there's a lot of history. So I'm not talking a lot with data and history, because at the end of the day, although I did research, but the fact is that today we can just Google data and find out. But the fact is the emotion behind the data is not what an AI will ever give you. So if you can tell those stories of your clothes without the data and just understand it through those emotions and all those additional aspects, other than jewelry, you have the petticoat, understanding the petticoat, understanding the inner garments of men and women and how they were technically not considered in the ancient time. There is a sense of shame now in inner garments, but earlier there was no sense of shame, and people were very comfortable in their skin. Just kind of doing the yoga in that loin cloth, right? That little thing, and they would wear a bloomer. So you look at Iyengar style of yoga, the guru is constantly in a loin cloth and does his BK Iyengar is constantly doing yoga and that. And there is a lot of power in movement with little clothing, not for skin show, but for understanding your muscle growth, understanding your muscle movement. So these inners were actually treated with a lot of respect. They were not looked down upon or shamefully or, treated with distaste or, or kind of shamed in any way. They were actually accepted that this is what it is, and let me use it for the function it is meant to be, rather than make it into a point of discussion which is out of context, right? These were the aspects of saris and understanding how you can figure out through the ancient rituals of geometry. And so here, this was basically a beautiful fulkari sari, which had collective stitching by one of the grandmothers. So this lady's grandmom made this sari. It was a beautiful fulkari sari. So it was upcycled into a little jacket, and it was like a cape, and which could be, it's again geometric in form. It has, from a ritualistic point of view, it has shape shifting. It is cyclical because it can go back. It's silk, and things like that. So a lot of factors came into the re-philosophy and the zero waste concept. Then this border was completely zero based and saved totally and attached onto a khaki silk, so which was hand woven. So the whole idea of it, and then I made those stitches myself. So I end up doing it. So in my free time, I put those green lines you can see. I bought some beads and I attached them. So this is a very mindful and a very evocative. So stitching was something which is part of our grandparents and our, great grandmother's sense of being. And it was gender agnostic. You see, the best tailors in the world are men. So it's nothing to do with gender. It's to do with the fact that we can repair our own clothes. And repair and upcycling was part of the ritual. So it is about understanding that and bringing it back. So this sari was all about repair and then recycling it and upcycling it with the emotions keeping intact and without getting latched on to the nostalgia, which could have actually killed the sari eventually, right? Because eventually, what would the silk do? It will just unravel and it just keep sitting in your wardrobe. But there is a lot of historic significance and ritualistic storytelling to something like this. So I ended up sketching. So when I lost my mother about 2 years ago now, it's over 2 years now. So all this healing that took place in my body and mind, I would keep sketching women in saris. There was a phase that phase just when I did in Hindu ritual, we call it the Mukhagni, right? There is a particular, you basically do that ritual. I'm sure the other religions will have their own rituals when someone passes over. So this was my ritual and it helped me heal that thing. So they were from not just a fashion, but also spiritual and philosophical. Each religion, their death rituals have such power and power of letting go. That is something that I learned as one of the 6th and 7th. So this was something it helped me going back into line drawing and sketching and writing and, understanding how she used to look, how she used to wear her saris. And these were little poems I would collect from my friends. I would end up writing poems. And so these were, if you see, all these are actually writing or stitching or squatting or, doing mugus and the alpana artwork, then stitching for your own clothes. These are rituals which are from the ancient fashion cycles and bringing them back, like little cholas that we had or chappals. We walk barefoot, and what is the closest to a barefoot? Or Kolhapuri chappal. Today, Prada has taken the course and it became such a big story with Prada taking up Kolhapuri chappals. Recently, if you Google, you'll find like hundreds of stories on how Prada had laced. So you'll find from haldi to yoga to Kolhapuri chappals to a lot of countries lay their claim on something which actually originated in India. But having said that, it is about we getting back not to the rubber chappals which are insulating. There's something called earthing and grounding, and we go back to chappals like probably old worn out leather like Kolhapuris or even straw or anything. You figure. Of course, now futuristic brands like, a lot of brands are working with materials which are ancient and building shapes and forms which are very futuristic. So they can have copper tabs under it to increase their, the circuits. Like they kind of add on to your earthing capacity. So things like that. So it really helped me in understanding and hair and using flowers in the hair. What was the need for all of this? Why would we, put flowers in our hair? Why would we decorate ourselves? And there are a lot of history and background and spiritual connotations to every symbolic use in a ritual in terms of fashion. So there's this very interesting sari semiotician, Dr. Vaibhavi Prithviraj Nanavade. She's written a beautiful book. It's called Indian Sari, Sartorial and Semiotics. It's by Routledge. And she talks about how sari, again, her brand, Vaibhavi P, is a slow fashion brand, and she does beautiful work with zero waste garments. And it's called subtraction pattern making. So that was actually a traditional ancient technique in fashion design. and which has been brought back. So zero waste and subtraction method is about understanding what needs to be eliminated without adding on something unnecessary to a pattern. So here we are looking at maximalism. Yes, it is important to some extent. I'm not saying everything is wrong or nothing right, but going back to subtraction or elimination in design becomes a lot more depth oriented than actually adding. You're adding weight by subtracting. You're adding gravitas to something. And so these brands like these, or she's a PhD in saris and all of that. People like these actually bring in a lot of context, and for me, they brought in a lot of information and contextualization in my storytelling as a journalist and as somebody who's been teaching. And so I put up these little stories. I share all of this, and this is something I do quite regularly, and I enjoy the whole process. And I hope the fashion rituals in your life, my last takeaway would be, if you have the time and space, just take a pen and paper over a weekend, sit with, actually use pen. Okay. Don't do it on your laptop or your digital gadget, and literally list out some rituals related to your style, fashion, your body, and your wellness, and see what is your blueprint coming from your lineage, your history, your background, your religion, because that is important to you. And nobody else can do that blueprint for you. And once you know them, see what can you apply, and inconsistently build consistency. It's not easy. You can't say 90 days I'm going to do this, because you might end up feeling, at least I have. I'm not such a practically hyper-driven person, and I was diagnosed with ADHD last 5 years ago, and I've been in therapy. So it has helped me understand my own body and mind. And because I have ADHD, I'm hyper creative and hyper focused. It's not lack of focus, but it is hyper focus. And that these rituals have helped me understand myself. And if you ask me 5 years ago who I was and what I am today, I think I'm a better version thanks to these rituals. And that is my final takeaway. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhavna. Thank you for taking us through a different view of heritage, which is both, personal and also invoking us to explore our personal connects. Thank you very much. Very interesting sort of dwelling into the history of especially the sari, but as any, drape format of clothing, which there were many as you showcased us. So initially, when you were talking about the drapes and the cowl pockets that the Adivasis have, they still have them, right? Because they go to pick fruits and berries from the in the forests. They just collect everything, and I am telling you that I'm genuinely envious of them, because I'm constantly looking for a pocket in my sari to put my phone in. So they have it one better than us. Yashpal had a question. His question is, what was the scene in the olden days in terms of clothing, and how did they accumulate their clothes, especially saris, and how did they, what did they do?
So firstly, olden days, the geography was very contained, right? If you notice, they didn't have like a flight to travel across continents and cities, or trains and buses, or any of the modes of transport. For them, it was walk or an animal, like a bullock cart or a horse ride or something like that. How much distance can you cover? So they had their geography contained, unless you're a warrior and you are going to conquer something. So in that little geography, initially it was barter, because that's how it started with, because it would barter their skill and the product and get their stuff. The secondary was then they started having the currency of money. And once the currency of money came in, they had their own community of weavers. So they were very self-sustaining communities. So the food was grown in their little community, whatever that geography is, in their village or the town or their region or the kingdom. And the clothes were woven. So there were different tribes or cults or little groups. They were assigned different roles. So they're called varnas and varnam and this thing, and they were given that particular job. So your skill is weaving, then that's your job. Your skill is pottery, then that's your job. So when you collect clothes, is about the fact that, as I said, I'll have 2 or 3, and that was enough. And once they're worn out, then you go back to the weaver and you get more. Either when it was initially bartering, then you barter and you get something else. So you give something of yours to get a particular piece historically, or you actually buy later when there was currency of money. That's how they would build their wardrobe. Again, There were wardrobes were not like how we have traditionally, like hundreds of pieces. We obviously there was much lesser. I hope that answers your question. But historically, if you just check on the history of the collection of clothing, whereas only the royalty could afford it. So there were three etats. That's how the third world came in, is because the first etat was the royalty, the second was the religious leaders, and the third was the mass or the folk. So that's what they were third etat, which is European concept. The first etat, the royalty has a lot of excess. So they had the power to actually get excess clothing, be it the brocades, and they could be it through, if you look at Malabar, Coromandel, or all the coastlines and the Silk Route and the history of how the clothing moved from one country to the other, you will see, and there's a beautiful book called Coromandel. It's by Alex, I've forgotten the second name, just Google it. It's about the Coromandel coast. And they talk about how fabrics were moved and how the rich could afford those fabrics and to build their wardrobes.
As someone was telling me, recently we were talking about saris being woven, which take 3 months to sort of weave, and therefore very very expensive saris. And we were, whether it was a Jamewar or whatever, and they did say that the saris were not meant for everyone to be able to afford it. Right? It was just the very wealthy who could afford that sari, and therefore it was okay for it to take 3 months to weave, and it was not a very frequent purchase either. But of course,
Yes.
those times have changed a lot.
Yes, and they were commissioned also and customized. So the little motifs or things were also according to the particular, if it's a dhoti or if it's that uttariya for a king or somebody, they were customized only. It was an exclusive piece which was woven for that particular royalty or the tribe or the family.
You're talking about the pillows, and Jyoti wants to know what those pillows are and where they're available.
So availability, the traditional ancient ritual of pillows, they were used. They were made at home. Like my mother-in-law made it for my son. She used an old Bengali tant sari, and she just hand washed it with a little turmeric and salt just to kind of soften it. Sun dried it. She cut it out, and she hand stitched it with running stitches. And then they sun dry the mustard, depending if it's like for a baby, it's a small one. In the book, I have given a DIY how to make it, and I've tried it. So what I did was I made it for my son, and it's made once in 6 months to 1 year, depending on the mustard. And once they're sun dried, they just poured in, and it's closed. And then you make little pillow covers and keep changing it for the baby. So a lot of doctors would say no, and a lot of doctors would say yes. So this is not medically proven, but if now there is some research on it, and there are people who are studying this from an orthopedic point of view. So I did speak to orthopedic doctors, and I got to know some perspectives. It's in the book there. So if you want those pillows, now you have different brands who make seed pillows. And similar pillows are made for the eyes as well. So the eye pillows are made with seeds. So they're little small ones. So you see wellness pillows and meditative pillows, which I use to relax your eyes. So it's something like, so I've spoken to an ophthalmologist as well. So she's like, listen, don't use anything heavy on your eyes. And that's common sense. You don't rub, you don't put anything heavy. But we say, okay, cool tea bag, something like that. A light pillow with few seeds is okay to just relax your eyes and put a little weight. So in somatic healing, I mean, I'm studying a little bit of yoga and stuff. So in somatic healing, they say anything which is cocooning and puts a little weight on your body calms your nervous system down a little bit. So it depends. You can try it because it's not harmful really, but again, there is no tried and tested. You can Google for mustard pillows, or you can Google for eye pillows, eye wellness pillows, and you'll get brands of dime a dozen. And pick anything that works for you.
If you can, please drop your Instagram handle in the chat so that people can reach out and follow you. Yashpal has complimented your sketches that you shared. They're
Thank you.
very lovely to look at. So,
Thank you so much. So I've just put up my website and my Instagram handle out there. So if anybody wants to leave some comments, do read the book because it has the 9 rituals, and I would love to know what is your feedback if you apply some of those and build your own blueprint.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Bhavna. It was a very thought-provoking talk that you gave us today. And thank you everyone for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again next week as well. Thank you and have a lovely weekend.